Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome everybody to the second event of our W12 Accelerator, Breaking the Cycle, COVID-19 and Water Insecurity. In this series, we're bringing together key thought leaders, change agents, and my YouTube on at the same time. Okay, we're bringing together key thought leaders, change agents, and experts to engage in critical dialogues for action. For those of you who haven't participated with us before, the W12 Plus programs is a movement jointly run by the Institute for Ecological Civilization and SOS NPO, nonprofits in the US and South Africa, respectively. W12 Plus is a movement that connects, catalyzes, and incubates urban water solutions. The W12 Plus Exchange, why we're here today, is one of the 5 main types of programs that we run. You may have seen our last event, Leading for Change, COVID-19 and Water Insecurity. If not, that is available on our YouTube page as a full event and as a highlight reel. This panel brought together leaders who provided a more macro level perspective of intergovernmental priorities, trends, key risks to look out for. Panelists voiced inspiring calls for action and innovative ideas were shared. We're now shifting gears for this panel to a more applied perspective, driving change for COVID-19 and water security, where we're going to hear from 4 incredibly proactive change makers who are driving long-term change for water security in the face of a pandemic, not to mention ongoing climate change and an ongoing water crisis. These individuals all work at specific leverage points for change within our collective pursuit of global water security, and we're thrilled to feature their work today. This panel will be structured a little bit differently than previous panels. It will be more dialogical in nature, and instead of reading full biographies at the beginning, our moderator, Philip, will briefly introduce each panelist and allow them to introduce themselves in the first question. We've also put a link in the chat where you may be watching with a document that includes the panelists' full bios, as well as links to their social media and their websites. As we are streaming on a few different platforms, please feel free to tweet questions at us. It's at W12_programs, or put them in the chat wherever you're watching. We aim to have time for a few questions at the end from the audience, so please do send them our way. If we don't get to answer them, we do typically try to weave them into the next panel's question. With all that said, I hope you enjoy this panel, and I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, the president of the Institute for Ecological Civilization, Philip Clayton. Philip.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this next W12 Plus Exchange. It's my privilege to be introducing you 4 global experts to engage in dialogue about the issues that we face in our current situation. W12 always seeks to balance the broader theoretical questions with actual innovations in practice, finding water solutions for regions and for cities. Today, we want to focus on those implementations, the kinds of actual changes on the ground that are being carried out by some of the leading water experts in the world. What I'd like to do is begin and invite each of our 4 panelists to introduce themselves. As Ellie said, you can see their full bios in the chat. And let me begin with my amico Nicoloma to tell us a few words about himself and the perspective that he brings to today's discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm quite humbled to be here, and I'm quite excited to share my experience with the world. I am Amico Nkoloma. I'm from Malawi. I am an innovator. I'm a university lecturer at the Polytechnic, and I own a tech company called Imosis, which develops technological solutions to make life better. You know, Malawi is one of the least developed countries, and to develop a tech company is not easy. However, we focused on challenges. We focused on problems which the country faces. And from there, we came up with solutions that actually assist in ensuring that life is better here in Malawi through the use of technology. My input in this discussion will revolve around technology, on how we have used technology, more especially mobile technology, to ensure that water security is, people have access to water in these COVID times. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maya. Our next panelist is Braulio Eduardo Moreira. Braulio.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I am the director of 50 Liter Home Coalition, which is a group or a platform for collaboration and innovation supported by World Economic Forum, at the 2030 Water Resources Group at the World Bank, as well as the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And our role is to create enabling environments for the innovation and bring private sector organizations together with public sector, government agencies, as well as NGOs, and create bold partnerships for collaboration. And by doing that, enabling better, faster collaborations. My background is architecture, and I spent a number of years working at the city scale, working as planning practitioner, and then at a number of city scale programs. So my perspective is cities, is what helps cities, what helps communities, and also systems. So how we can explore issues around water and innovation, but from a broader perspective. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Valio. Tom Ferguson, could you introduce yourself and the work that you do?
Sure. Thanks for having me here, Philip and team. I'm probably the least qualified on this panel. I spent 5.5 years running the Accelerator at Imagine H2O, which is an entrepreneurship program for the sort of the best water innovators in the world. And over the last kind of 6 months, I've turned my attention to building Burnt Island Ventures. I'm the managing partner there. And really, what we're trying to do at Burnt Island Ventures is put a new brick in the wall of the funding stack of water innovation. This is not going to be news to anybody, certainly on the panel and most people in the audience, I wouldn't imagine. But our ability to respond to the challenges of a changing climate, changing demographics, changing locations of many hundreds of thousands, millions of people is predicated really on our ability to steward the water molecule. And one of the things that I think is most dangerous about the way in which we're sort of choosing to respond to the climate crisis is often the omission of water as an element in that conversation. And we sort of decided that our kind of intervention was going to be the providers of capital at the earliest stage possible in the development of the highest potential technologies that will allow the world to respond to a changing situation. So we've been in business officially for just over a month, actually. We signed our LP agreement. And we've got some really, really interesting solutions in the portfolio already. And so hopefully that sort of sees how this, shows you how this is going to map onto this conversation around water security, but hopefully I can bring a little bit of the perspective of what is being built globally by some really talented individuals like Maya.
Thanks, Tom. And finally, it's my pleasure to introduce Luca Leonardson and ask her to tell us about her work and perspective.
Well, thank you so much. My name is Luca Leonardson. I work, actually I have 2 hats on. I work for the city of Copenhagen, where I've been working for almost 25 years with urban planning. And for the last 13 years, a lot with water, wastewater management, adaptation, water quality, and all these other issues been key in developing our adaptation plan and cloudburst management plan. But currently, I'm also working for an organization called C40, where I'm running a program called Water Safe Cities, which actually look at both with research and with technical assistance to cities on climate change related water challenges that cities around the world are facing. And as part of this project, we have actually also started a network of cities that are working with water security issues. It is becoming an increasingly important thing for cities to deal with these issues. So that's why it's important that an organization like C40 also engages itself in that. So and it's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Luca. Let's move directly to the questions and begin to engage in dialogue. This event occurs at a time that the effects of the global pandemic are still astronomical around the world. Indeed, we're beginning to see differences of response of more wealthy and less wealthy nations. But the situation in many of the places where you work is deeply influenced by the COVID crisis. Maya, could I ask you first to say, how has this global pandemic affected the water and sanitation projects that you're aware of in the regions and sectors where you're working? And how has your work changed? What priorities have shifted for you during the pandemic? And then I'll ask others just to jump in when you're done and see what they would add to that. Thanks, Maya.
Okay. All right. No, thanks, Philip. Yeah, Malawi is one of the least developed countries, as I've already mentioned in the introduction. And we don't have a strong manufacturing industry. As such, we rely on importation. So most of the plumbing materials, infrastructure for water are actually imported. And I know with the pandemic, the borders were closed. And as such, it was quite difficult to have these materials into the country to ensure that projects actually are facilitated. And this actually hit us hard. And many projects actually, they were prolonged, they were, not done on time. And many people actually suffered because we didn't have enough materials to ensure that these projects are actually handled. Another issue is, on site management of personnel. You're doing a project, you have people there, but now COVID, brought things like social distancing. And at the same time, we had people who are ill, others are in quarantine. So you see that the numbers actually reduced. And in that case, this gave us challenges to ensure that these projects are actually done on time. So, the more the time a contractor is on site, the more the money is spent. That was one of the challenges. And another issue, when you talk about water and sanitation projects, more especially in the rural areas, training, capacity building is key, because you just can't give a solution to people in the rural areas without training. And this training actually requires, to put these people in groups and conduct the trainings. And due to COVID, it was almost impossible. So that was one of the challenges also that actually COVID actually brought to, projects like that we're doing here in Malawi and also similar areas in the SADC region. Another issue is on site supervision. You are doing a project, you go back and forth to the site to do supervision, conduct meetings, progress review meetings, and things like that. So you see that these meetings were actually postponed, and we opted for virtual, like what we're doing now, Zoom. And these virtual meetings, are not as effective because we can't see much, we can't know much on what is happening on the ground because we can't be there physically. So that was also another major issue. Another issue is also on the designing works. People are working from home. There's a lot of disturbances at home, and it's not as effective as it is to work on a table with your colleagues. So we are highly affected also because of this thing to do with working from home. However, what can we do? It's the pandemic is here. We needed to shift how we are doing things. And Malawi and other similar countries like Malawi, we had to embrace technology and innovation to ensure that at least these things are done. We have to do it to ensure that these projects are actually handed over to the community. So more innovative ideas were coming up to ensure that service delivery is actually 100%.
Crowley, I saw you, thank you. I saw you nodding your head as you have had some similar experiences during these months.
Yeah, I think there is, if I had to articulate this, for me, it's really around the lack of preparedness from particularly governments to face a crisis. It is clear that in most places, city governments and state governments are prepared for emergencies, but very rarely for a crisis. And the big difference is that a crisis is an ongoing problem that doesn't seem to be finishing, which is what most of us feel at the moment. So how you prepare about this? I feel that the city governments that actually have been able to develop systems thinking have been able to better respond to these and really, write the complicated storm of that a pandemic means. And what this really means is about how you can think about your city more dynamically. One very important issue, and that's an issue from the articulation, scoping of new projects to the delivery, is that states actors normally see processes as linear processes. So when there is a big problem in between, many of those don't know how to react. So I think the challenge and the big, I think lesson particularly for governmental actors as well as private sector actors is how you take more decisions in a more agile manner, how you enable your teams to respond to the situation as data shows that actually the crisis is getting worse or better, how you develop iterative processes that enables your team to think and rethink plans in a very in a very natural and appropriate way. And finally, it's really around having access to the right tools. And I think that is the really interesting thing about the work that Slike and organizations like C40s or Cities, Resilient Cities Network and UNDRR programs have, that they provide those tools so that cities can better respond to these unexpected challenges.
If Luca or Tom wants to jump in.
And Leslie has something. I just wanted to sort of an observation. I know that we're probably focusing a little bit more on the sort of situation outside of the United States, but I think one of the most striking things about being here in the States has actually been the resilience of the operations of the water sector. We've been in our homes for a year, right? And while there are obviously problems there, it's a bit disconcerting to see the good people of Austin, Texas queuing up in a park for a standpipe for access to water in the freeze 2 weeks ago. But I've been really struck by actually the ability of people who are usually characterized as large, cumbersome, unable to change kind of organizations that quite literally kept the taps running under insanely difficult circumstances. I remember the pictures of the teams, the sequestered teams at the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California in Los Angeles. These people being away from their families for 2-3 weeks at a time at the beginning of a global pandemic when everybody couldn't have been more scared. And I think it's just a testimony to the work that these people do. But I want to pick up a little bit on what Maya said, in that it's a really important, as you think about the role of technology and innovation in the response to things like the COVID-19 crisis, it's really easy to get caught up in the widget, the thing that does the sampling, that releases the analysis in real time or whatever it is. All of that is really important, and I'm sure we'll get onto it. But what Maya said, I think, really highlights extremely well the importance of practicality in understanding what it takes on the ground to deliver the value proposition to your customers, right? It's hard to get onto a building site, right? You can have all of the awesome technology in the world, but if you can't, actually get it up and running practically, then, maybe it's, a good idea to start simpler. It's easy for technologists to get lost in the equations and lose sight of the practical realities of delivering those solutions on the ground.
Yeah, that's right. Luca, would you like to add anything from your work in Copenhagen?
Well, I think one of the experiences that we've had in Denmark and in Copenhagen, and that I'm also seeing in other cities, is that the COVID pandemic has sort of launched an unprecedented capacity to change and innovation. We have seen a society that has completely, just days basically before Denmark closed down, we were discussing whether we could actually ask of the Danes, because of the need for CO2 reductions, to limit their annual flights. And 2 days after or 2 weeks after, nobody could fly anywhere, and we haven't been flying anywhere for the past year, and we've also seen an enormous innovation. they are vaccinating people around the world now in a vaccine that has been developed in less than a year. So there's a lot of things there that I think we can bring into it. And I think the water sector has also proven its capacity in it. I mean, in many countries, they're using wastewater to trace infection and actually being able to locate local clusters of infections before you can actually see them in people actually getting ill.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, it's sort of proven to me that there's a greater capacity for change than we actually expected. And I think that's an important lesson. And also, I mean, in C40, we've had a task force of mayors who've been working on COVID responses and sort of that idea of sharing knowledge and seeing how physically cities are also changing as a result of this is fantastic.
Yeah, it does give us some sense of how we respond well and how we respond poorly to crises. And two of you have emphasized things that we've done well, actually, in these last months. Let's shift the topic a little bit and to talk about the challenges that COVID poses to water security projects in communities, in specific communities. Braulio, might I begin with you this time? What, in your view, have been the most significant bottlenecks or challenges for mobilizing water security solutions and to getting the projects moving during COVID-19? What have you seen?
I think one of the main challenges is the siloed thinking in, across private sector and in many public sector organizations. The fact that when people articulate, and I think that's also a failure of those working in the sector, that when we articulate water projects, we solely focus on water, and we engage with water departments, and we try to engage with water authorities. The issue is that, in one of the nice things about the emerging work that we are trying to shape here in 50 Liter Home is that actually we have realized that when we talk about, for example, reducing water consumption at home, there is a very, very strong link to energy. So now we are trying to talk about both, how water efficiency is completely connected with also energy consumption reduction. So how we can enable those conversations is something that is commonly very, very difficult because our organizations are, structured in a certain way. And so I see that is a challenge that is emerging more and more, particularly as we try to start connecting water sector agendas with, of course, our climate emergency that we're experiencing as well. And the other aspect is for me, it's really around the ability to recognize an opportunity from the crisis. There are authorities that, of course, have realized that actually this is an opportunity to rethink their economy, and even in some cases, there are opportunities to really reinvent our economic basis in cities. So how we can actually translate that to the water sector, where water sector is really driven by policies that normally are not very dynamic, by authorities that, because of the very essential role they have, for them it's more difficult to absorb innovation. So how we do that, how we connect, how we recognize what are the basics, which is providing a resilient service and access to safe and equitable access to water for people. Then realizing what is emerging from this and how our policy needs to adapt to those challenges that are emerging. And finally, how we connect water challenges to those big problems that are coming closer and closer, which are those related to, of course, climate change, but also the impacts of climate change, which is water stress, which is something that is increasing in so many cities globally.
Fantastic. What are other challenges that panelists would mention that we've seen during COVID-19? And what kinds of solutions have you seen emerging? I want to keep it really specific of things you're aware of, some companies you work with, firms, or projects that each of you is involved in. Maya.
Yeah, thanks, Philip. I also just had something in mind. to do with revenue collection. I've seen that most of the utility companies have been hit hard in terms of money because of lockdown situation. Most of big corporations are now working at home, but these guys actually, they rely more on them when it comes to revenue collection. So when these companies are closed, then it means the water utility companies don't have enough funding. They don't have enough finances to ensure that they're able to sustain the water system. So that's also one of the challenges which I actually noticed due to COVID. Another challenge which I think could also be crucial is, Africa. Many will rely on collaboration with Europe, the US, when it comes to expertise. And now, we can't, travel. The borders are down. So, we have challenges to get added technical expertise from people like you to assist in our projects. Those are the two things maybe I could contribute as of now. Maybe I'll come on later.
I see Tom moving.
Yeah, I think Maya's absolutely right about the utilities don't operate with a terribly deep balance sheet, right? In terms of the sort of degree of cash they have to absorb the kind of shock that they've had, particularly from such an increasingly important source of revenue, which is not only the provision of water, but also the provision of wastewater and sewerage services to essentially kind of the industrial and commercial sectors. I don't think we can necessarily use the word cataclysm, but households alone in California, and sorry to keep this in the US, but just to give you an idea of scale, households in California alone are $1 billion in water debt. And to put that into perspective, the degree of debt relief from the last stimulus bill was $625 million, I believe. So 2/3 of California's debt alone. There's a lot of the rest of the country, the world, and I think that's extrapolatable to the rest of the world. And so that's going to be something that we're dealing with for a very, very long time. I think the other thing that Maya mentioned that's really kind of interesting is the the closing of the borders. I think maybe one of the observations that I've made is that borders have just become quite a lot less relevant. Now we're obviously dealing with a physical molecule here, right? So place matters. There's no way you can get around that. But I think in the observations that I've made in my business, in the financing of ideas, one of the sort of the tropes that I think has been exposed to be absolute garbage is this idea that you have to meet founders in person before you invest in them. It's just rubbish. And that's great. It means that I can have a conversation with Maya in Malawi, and I'm not making any promises, obviously, Maya. That would be cool, though. That would be a cool outcome from a webinar. That I can talk to Maya in Malawi, and if Maya's got the stack of what we're looking for in terms of entrepreneurial process to go and provide a solution in country, and we think that there's a sustainable business there, I don't need to meet Maya in person. And that I think is going to be a really interesting greasing of the wheels of the international kind of technological ecosystem that is not going to go away once these borders reopen. We've got used to this, and that's a very, very profound change, I think.
The others may want to respond. Yeah, Maya's happy about the funding. I'm also wondering about reprioritizing because priorities have shifted in radical ways. And I think many of the audience may not know as closely as you all know what that actually means in practice for cities, for example, to be shifting their water priorities in the time of global crisis.
So, well, I can, yeah, I think it's you're absolutely right that a lot of cities have been switching their priorities. They've been switching to having a focus on water quality. I mean, the sanitation issue has become, very, very crucial for many cities. That to avoid spreading of infection. I mean, you need clean water, you need access to clean water, and it's a big, big challenge. It's not something that cities have been able to solve, but I think it's sort of heightened the importance of that movement towards providing clean water to citizens, but also looking at water resources, because, I mean, again, with scarce resources, you also need to be clever about how you use what you've got. We have cities around the world that have been running very close to running out of water. Cape Town is one of them. Istanbul have had trouble. Melbourne, Chennai. So I mean, there are lots of cities where we've seen this. So we need to be aware of this in the future. And I think the pandemic has underlined the need for these resources.
Mm-hmm. Maya, is there anything you wanted to add before we move to another topic?
No, I think we're good. I think I might come in somewhere in between.
Good.
Yeah,
let's shift a little bit then more toward identifying solutions and some of the strategic opportunities that you all see as arising out of the COVID-based challenges, especially in the context of planning water and sanitation projects, and of course funding them as well. Tom, do you want to jump in on this one first?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, in the last question, I think, it's probably my responsibility to get kind of practical about solutions because I see a lot of them.
Yeah.
So in terms of the practicality, I think one of the things that is pretty interesting is the enabling of what is essentially a very kind of hands-on business to be hands-off, basically. And so you look at kind of companies like Doppler, for example, in the US, which is basically an emergency response management system. But it means that things can be reported and then handed out to crews in order of importance and in order of location due through natural language processing and all the rest of it, to allow crews to essentially not have to go into the Monday morning standing out like round the truck in person, which is still kind of risky, that they can get up, get into their truck, turn their mobile on, and then they can get to work. And in a similar vein, I sort of think about companies like e-water services, which, one of the worst things about access to sanitation was the lack of thinking through of solutions. Like, thank you very much for the well that you built us free of charge, which then broke after 6.5 months, and there was no plan to deal with it. Right? There was no way of making this kind of entity that becomes relied upon within a community very, very quickly into essentially a going concern. And e-water services are doing a really good job of kind of filling in that gap. I've also been quite struck by kind of the tailwinds to kind of individual solutions. There are two examples. Firstly, Drinkwell, which is based in Bangladesh, but also has operations in northeastern India. People needed to wash their hands, and they needed to wash their hands quickly, and they needed to wash their hands in public, right? And so what happened? A drinking water station with basically a resin removal, contaminant removal solution. They just moved the sink outside, ran a pipe from the filtration system outside, and suddenly people had access to water. Also, fantastic marketing for them and their solution, not to be sort of too much about it. And then I just had a conversation this week with a really interesting group. They're backed by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Power Water is bringing kind of the logic essentially of Uber to the delivery of affordable private water, starting in Mombasa, but they'll be in Nairobi soon. But really sort of harnessing the mobile first world to be able to allow people very, very cheaply to be able to have water delivered to them and not have to go to a central point of gathering where obviously the risk is elevated. I think that the degree of ingenuity is very, very, very interesting. The last one I'll mention is 120 Water. I'm on the advisory board. They were they were number 8 on the list of top 10 innovative sustainability companies as chosen by Fast Company. So go water. But they Liquor alluded to this. They're doing remote sample sensing to allow people to do early warning systems. The degree of ingenuity around this is remarkable, and I think we've seen a kind of a systemic shift. But I'll pause there because I could go on for ages.
That's really inspiring, actually. Are there other samples that others of you would bring that you've encountered over the last year? These sort of innovative solutions that could easily be replicated in different places independent. Yeah, Maya.
Yeah. How to know that this is the right solution? I think it's key. I believe in localized solutions because it is quite difficult to take something that works in the US and to replicate it in Malawi because their environment are different. So something can be perfect in the US, something can be perfect in England, but to bring it to Africa or developing countries could be challenging because of culture, the way people think, the environment is also different, and the problems are also different. So I believe more in looking into the challenges, the real challenges that people face, and then come up with a solution that directly solves that challenge. And this is the way which we are doing in Malawi. And it's making some of us to be like, we are good when it comes to thinking. But just because we feel that if we are in touch more with the people on the ground and bring something that works for them, then can be great. And similarly, if you look at Malawi, we have Zambia, Mozambique, these countries around here, the SADC region, the activities are similar. So you see that what works in Malawi can easily be replicated in Zambia, can easily be replicated in Tanzania. And in this way, it means collaboration is key, because if people can interact more, it means we'll not waste time in research and development, because we have a guy in Tanzania has already developed a solution. We just start it, collaborate, find people to finance, Tom, come here. What do you think about this? Then we easily replicate, and boom, we're gone. We have developed the region. People have water. Everyone is happy. We are not worried about hygiene, sanitation things. So I think if we had to think in those lines, could be better. And I really like the database that W12 have done. We have all key projects there. I mean, it's a platform where people can go in and learn and see how they can tap into solutions and replicate in their regions. So I really recommend W12 with that initiative and coming up with that initiative. And we are happy that we have a project in Malawi that is added on that. It's only automated kiosks. I don't know if my 2 minutes is done, but let me try to speak quick.
So I'm actually going to jump in here since we're running a little short on time, but I want the audience to know that your video is available through the W12 site, and it may be that the staff will be able to chat out the link to it live here on this broadcast. Braulio, do you have anything to add to this sort of regional focus that Maya is focused on? And then I do want to ask Luca about the move from balance between short and long-term solutions, and whether the long-term work that she's been involved with for decades, and also now in cities around the world in C40, has moved to short-term crisis management, how the long and short-term may have changed during the crisis. But Braulio, did you have a response to what Maya was saying?
I think I have a slight caveat to Maya's perspective. And I think that one of the issues when we are trying to use a solution that was created in a particular region in another region is not that, in my perspective, is not that that process is by design a flawed process. For me, the step that normally it's missed in that process is the understanding why things work, where they work, and why they work, and a reflection around that before it's applied somewhere else. And the issue is that when that reflection it doesn't happen, it's where those mistakes that international development practitioners have made, and I include myself there, for decades, that it's around trying to just bring a foreign solution to a new geography and not to think about how that solution needs to be adapted. Because there are examples out there that show really good best practice, but the issue is that that cannot be just automatically applied. For example, in the Netherlands, the planning and thinking about water, it covers every aspect of city making. That includes from city planning to rail infrastructure, everything. Whenever you are designing or planning anything in the Netherlands, you need to think about water. How that can be applied to a country like a South American country where I come from, or an African country, that is where lots of thinking needs to be integrated. And I think that level of thinking is something that is not happening. Other examples are, for example, the city of Barcelona, where the climate plan, the resilience plans also talk about water. So water is, again, something that is becoming omnipresent across planning in the city. but how you use that in an African city, in an Asian city, in a Latin American cities, that is where, you know, people need to spend more time. And just to go back to innovative solutions, because I think it's something that is very beautiful, the Conquer Design Initiative in Nairobi, I feel it's a really good example of this. This is an initiative that really works with the communities in order to identify the best solutions. And whilst they choose entry points such as infrastructure or sanitation, they always see the big picture. And I feel that is a very beautiful approach that, in my perspective, brings best practices from abroad, from outside Kenya, but they really discuss those with the communities in order to understand how that solution needs to be improved before they apply it in those communities in Nairobi.
I have never done a panel where the complexities of similarity and difference within a region and across regions, types of cities and types of challenges has been so clearly expressed as in these last two answers. That's extremely helpful. Look, we've talked about regional similarities and differences. We haven't yet talked about the time scale shift during the epidemic. And I'm just guessing that with your work in Copenhagen and C40, that's something you've seen a lot about. Can you share some of those observations?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's been a period where you went from long-term planning to short-term planning on everything on how to organize city day-to-day maintenance in a safe way. I mean, we have had one-way walking around some in the parks in Copenhagen because there were so many people out, because that was the only thing to do. So there are lots of sort of very, very short-term things. And there's also short term in the way, some way also how we think about sort of bouncing back afterwards. We talked before the pandemic about sustainable tourism in Copenhagen because there were so many tourists. Now, I mean, everybody's screaming, let's get some tourists. So some of these things are actually sort of changing. And I think to some extent, I can see them mainly when it comes to the economic sector and sort of in handling an acute situation, like how do we actually control the public space in a situation like this. But I don't see them sort of in general as affecting Copenhagen's plans for water and how to manage that. It's still moving on. And I think it is in many cities. I've heard from cities like New York and so on, that a lot of budget was shifted around in the cities from climate planning, from water planning, from resilience planning to directly COVID measures. In New York, for instance, they had to install, I can't remember the number, 75,000 or something like that, air conditioned units, because normally in the summer they have cooling centers for people to go. And of course they couldn't sort of pool together a couple of thousand people in the same place. So they had to help in another way. And that takes budget away from other measures. So of course, this is something that you meet in the cities.
Mm-hmm. Can we transition, Luca, while you have the microphone, to this question of replicability that Maya brought up and Braulio spoke to as well? It's actually extremely difficult to say how do we know that when solutions that were designed for some specific local context are actually replicable in others and when they aren't? So what would be examples that would help the audience sort out this question? That it's usually not carefully addressed in the literature and discussions.
No, my experience after working also internationally for a number of years now is that there's always a need for some local translation. You always need to look into the context is key. I mean, it's anything from mechanisms of financing, it's local legislation, it's local climate issues, it's all kinds of things that you need to take into consideration. But having said that, I find that, I mean, also I can see in C40 that there's so much going on where cities are inspiring each other. They're in friendly competition, or if they can do it, we can also do it. So there's a lot of I wouldn't say copying, but inspiration going and some of the solutions that we have developed, for instance, in Copenhagen, are being now moved to other cities. We've worked with Durban, we've worked with New York, we are working with Houston now. So we are working with other cities, and they're not copying exactly what we have been doing in Copenhagen when it comes to stormwater management, for instance, but they're being inspired by it and using it in their local context. And that's how I think we can use it. Then you, of course, can have technical stuff, things, that's not my specialty. I'm more in the planning area. I mean, pumps and digital solutions and so on that you can directly apply. But I think in general, a lot of the thing is about
So what would the
inspiring each other.
Sorry, what would the other experts say? There are the tech solutions, which are directly transferable. There are solutions that can be applied in analogous locations and challenges. And then there's what Luca calls the inspiration quotient. How would you see those working out, Tom?
Yeah, so I think there are a few things I think that are worth kind of highlighting. One, this plays out all the time, right? The big one in my world is that there's a lot of really interesting stuff that comes out of Israel, but nowhere near as much stuff from Israel gets commercialized kind of outside Israel than you would expect, because they have one utility. They're the size of New Jersey. Water is 10 times the price, and it's an existential threat. Like, you know, pretty favorable conditions for building a business. There are obviously great examples of Israeli companies that have come out, but they kind of, we're going to take over the world, and then because the context that they're going into is too different from where they've built their basis. And I think the observation in that, and I think this is where, Maya, I think you've got a really, really interesting example, is that if you focus on the things that don't change, right? People like good prices, good quality, good selection, good access, good convenience, things that fit into their life, like whatever, good branding, things that make them feel good, whatever it is. If you focus on the things that don't change, you as an innovator, and innovators like you in countries like Malawi and elsewhere, you have an opportunity to build something that fits your market. And if it fits your market, at a fundamentally different cost basis than somebody who is trying to make something in Philadelphia and then move it over to Malawi. So if you have the opportunity to build the thing at the base of the trajectory of the global market, that you can then move up in terms of cost basis and quality and whatever you want to be doing. But if you can make your business work where you are, your opportunities are endless, right? And I think this is really the observation, is that there is such power in people who are operating in very, very challenging economies to rely on observations about things that don't change, right? Build products to that. And then you have optionality, because you've created something underneath an economic incentive structure, market structure, that is only going to get easier elsewhere, right? And so that's a really huge deal. And I think in Latin America, there's a really interesting example. We invested in a company in 2019 called Zilpa Trenchless that has been doing its development of its trenchless technology, which is going to be a huge deal for the excavation of the renewal and replacement of infrastructure. But they've been doing it in the suburbs of Bogota, right? Fundamentally different cost bases. The machine doesn't care whether or not it's in Indianapolis or in Bogota. It's just a hell of a lot more cost effective to be able to get through V1, V2, V3 of it in this context, and then bring it over to big projects and raise your cost basis by moving into the other markets. And it's a fascinating dynamic.
Let me just say, Brala, you're an expert in design throughout your career, and including building and architecture. Those seem highly local, and yet some of those design features in your later career, you've been able to transfer across multiple different contexts. Can you talk about this replicability question out of your particular expertise?
Sure. So first of all, I wouldn't call myself an expert in construction at all. But having said that, I think that what in design and in planning makes a big difference is the adoption of best practice. And again, what works and how and where and why and how that can be applied in other contexts is something that in planning and architecture is highly relevant. And in 50 Liter Home, the way I bring this is by really highlighting the basics of design, and particularly the basic of collaborative design, which is really around identifying what are the right steps in the development of a product, a methodology, a tool the importance of exploring this from various perspectives and engaging with others. So an architect rarely designs something on themselves. Architects must engage with engineers, with other people. And that's perhaps the pleasure I have in 50 Liter Home, that I work with organizations like Procter & Gamble, Kohler, Arcadis, who actually bring their expertise in creating new ideas. But what I feel is absolutely necessary, and it's something that day after day I have conversations with those teams, is really around how you actually build that process where you engage with people, think about their experience, how you bring their expertise, and how then you are able to create something new. And as Tom said, context in that particular perspective is essential. And where I feel that organizations like mine, but so many others, have a great potential is by exposing innovations to very, very different contexts. Because what is happening is that many of startups, for example, that we have here in Europe, they think about their own markets, their own demands, and of course, those products work. But our job at 50 Liter Home is then to trigger thinking around the next generation. So what if we take this solution for water use and we take it to the north of Mexico? And we make people to interact with this and see what happens. That is what I feel is it's a huge opportunity. But again, thinking about best practice, what are the right steps, what are the right conversations, I feel it's the basic ingredient.
Perfect, thank you. Let's transition to audience questions. We have quite a number of questions that have come in from sources around the world. We'll only be able to get to a few of them in the next 6 minutes, so we have to keep answers a little bit short. Maya, could I ask you about the first question? An audience member writes, how do we drive the inspiring workable solutions in the countries and cities that most need them? And there are some principles behind your work, the breakthroughs, the training you received in your advanced studies in India, for example, in Pune. What are the principles that you would like to bring in the perspective of Malawi or Pacific nations to drive the workable solutions in the countries and cities that most need them? What would you raise to the top in answering this question?
Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, I believe there's no blueprint, there's no general formula. But what I've seen that has worked, and I believe it's a solution, and I also indicated area. For example, you look at ourselves, we are a tech company in Africa. It's challenging to be successful because people in Africa, they have their own needs, the water, food, clothing, and you talk about technology, it's more like an accessory. So what we do is, a trick is you brand yourself like what we've done. We've brand ourselves towards solution solving. So the only way that we can come up with a recipe, I cannot talk about Europe, but maybe I can talk about Africa, is actually to concentrate on problems, to concentrate on challenges. What are the issues? So we have issues with energy, for example, and today we are talking about water. Now we'll dig deep into water, and you point out, why is it that people don't have water in the rural areas? Oh, it's because of ABCD. Therefore, if we do ABCD and these people have water, everyone is happy. Similarly, Malawi and Zambia, Mozambique, Kenya, Ghana, Uganda, we're almost the same. So the challenges that work in Malawi, they solve problems, things work. I find it can be easily be replicated to these other countries which have common denominator, which have the common problems. So I find it as a key recipe that, and I think Eduardo there, I think we're conflicting a little bit, but that's what I found it working. Because we've done many products, but we had one product on the kiosk, the automation. It went like what fire. We are in Madagascar, we are in we are in Nigeria, we are everywhere, just because it actually solved one challenge that is key in the rural areas. So I think as long as there's no blueprint, but I feel probably maybe that would be it. Thanks, Philip.
The next question from the audience, I'm not sure which of the other three of you wants to take it on. Maybe several of you want to address it. It's a great question. What are the greatest opportunities for cross-sector collaboration? So private, public, and NGOs that you're seeing at this point in water work. Yeah, let me leave that right, the first question right there. What are the greatest opportunities for cross-sector collaboration you see right now?
I can try from that. I think I think I would actually see two things. I mean, there's a cross sector, which is the private, public, and research sector. I mean, I think there's a potential there for a lot of development for solutions if it's applied in the right way, where it's actually the people in need of the solutions that raise the questions and not the researchers. I mean, I think that's where we often end up being case studies rather than actually people with need of solutions. That's the one thing. The other thing, when you said cross-sector, for me, working in a local government and also with C40, cross-sectors within local government, there's an enormous potential for using water as a mediator for creating a better urban life. If you are doing something, you can also do other things to improve life quality, fighting urban heat island, social inequity, and all of these other issues. You can actually also deal with it if you are able to get the different sectors to work together and have a strong political and administrational impact on how they actually work together. Then you can see something that I like to call, I know it's a little bit fluffy name, but a transformative adaptation, where climate change, for instance, is not just something about a technical fix or avoiding flooding or storing water, but it actually has an even greater purpose with a lot of co-benefits from other cities. There's a great project in Durban where they have been doing this on they call it transformative riverine management, and it's about preventing flooding.
We're just at 60 seconds. I'm going to see if either Tom or Bradley wants to jump in. Your term again, Luca, transformative adaptation.
Yeah.
Very nice. Tom or Bradley, to close, 45 seconds.
I'd be a little bit more of a blunt instrument on this, and I think that other people should get out of our way, personally. Like, who cares about what everyone else is doing if water isn't solved, right? Whether it's sanitation or if your city's collapsing into the aquifer that it was built on, or it's falling into the sea in the case of Jakarta. Like this is at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs for a reason. And the idea that like we sort of have to sort of suddenly play nice and get our little bits of like scraps at the table. No, I think the cross-sectoral collaboration is that the other sectors should get out of the way. Let's solve water first for every reason, from gender equity to healthcare to education to the whole lot. Everything, all of it relies on access to safe water. So I think that the other sectors should do a much better job of dealing with us.
Fantastic. Tom, great closing words. I'm going to ask the audience from around the world to join me in thanking the panel for really a brilliant hour of discussion. Thank you very much for your work. Can you hear the applause?
Thank you for all of your work.
And I turn it over then to close to Ellie Leaning, Programs Director for W12 Plus.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you all. That was really fantastic. As you all know, at W12, we always try to focus on solutions, and that's a core tenet of our programs, of our mission, and of all of the work we do, whether it's W12 itself or in our kind of organization bodies, EcoCiv and SOS NPO. So this conversation was extremely inspiring, and I want to thank all of you for your time and expertise that you contributed to this. I want to make a note that we have an exciting event coming up next month that we'd love you to all hold on your calendars. It's the W12 Plus Drive-In event in Johannesburg, and that will be on Earth Day on April 22nd. And it will be a hybrid event, so in person in Johannesburg and virtually streamed around the world. It will be hopefully our biggest event yet to date, and we are working under some serious kind of COVID regulations and changing scenarios in Johannesburg, but it all seems likely, and we are very excited to have you and hope you'll join us then. And in that case, thank you all very much, and we loved having you today. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
We offline, Jeremy? Confirmed?
Excellent. Thank you.